The numerous shortcomings and challenges and failures of the South African police force, unfortunately, rear up on a daily basis, affecting all South Africans across the board, and unfortunately affecting those the most who can't, for example, afford things like private security. But even in that regard, over the last few years, we've seen instances in more so-called township or informal areas where people try and pool whatever disposable income they have to put up a boom, for example, or to try and get some kind of security around their communities, their homes, their schools, etc. So it's an ongoing problem that, of course, impacts on business stability, employment, and indeed on the economic growth potential of South Africa. One of the ideas to deal with the ongoing issues from SAPS, and maybe to help the SAPS as well, it's not just trying to attack and critique the National Police Service, but is this idea of decentralization. So talking about some elements of devolving powers, looking at where provinces and cities, metros, can take over and work with SAPS in different regards to deal with some of these challenges. Joining us to unpack the latest developments in this regard, we have Daniël Eloff. Daniel, thanks very much for being back here on the CRA YouTube channel. You recently had a piece published in Business Day, to which we will link in the description below. If you can just give us a little bit of background of this sort of idea of decentralization. I mean, in the article, you mentioned that the Constitution imagines 3 spheres of government, so of course, national, provincial, and local. But in policing, power has been pulled tight into the hands of the National Police Commissioner and the Minister of Police. Can you give us some background as to why the police in South Africa is so centralized?
Thanks, Chris, and it's lovely to be back on the CRA's channel. It's one of sort of the unfortunate historical relics that we're sitting with in South Africa, is the very densely centralized nature of the South African Police Service. And what I write about in the article is that it's partly part of the history, and we need to remember sort of the circumstances in which these negotiations took place when the constitutional dispensation was created. There was severe anxiety among the ANC that if you devolve too much police powers to, for example, provinces, that those provinces will be too strong. And we need to recall that at that stage, KwaZulu-Natal was very firmly not in the ANC's hands. And there was a particular concern, therefore, about KwaZulu-Natal having effectively its own police force and its own men with guns. And that's the sort of real politics behind the considerations at that time. And now we're sitting 30 years later with this legislative design and this policing framework that's very heavily centralized. There are sort of federalized elements to it. You have provincial police commissioners, and you have provincial police on a provincial government level, provincial oversight over police functions. But the point is that the practice, the management, the actual execution of policing very much happens from Pretoria. So you have this one-size-fits-all approach, which I think you don't really have to say anything else. Most South Africans are completely aware of the failure of SAPS, and that they simply do not have the monopoly on violence that they're supposed to.
But Daniel, let's pretend, for a minute, just kid ourselves and imagine a world where the South African economy is growing between 5% and 7% per year, and we've got more tax revenue coming in that SARS doesn't know what to do with, and we could just capacitate SAPS, to our wildest dreams. So those who think, in that scenario, you just give more resources to SAPS. Why wouldn't that, for example, fix some of these shortcomings and these issues that we see on a daily basis across the country?
Well, it's the same as many problems that we have in South Africa. It's not a lack of resources. It's a lack of accountability and a lack of implementation. We see, for example, when it comes to education, some of the highest per capita spending on education in the world, but yet some of the lowest outcomes. And the same goes for policing. It's not a funding issue. The same goes for healthcare. It's not that the police don't have the necessary funding. It's that the management and the complete SAPS capture is just too massive. And that's why my view is decentralization or devolution, or whatever you'd like to call it, is a viable alternative for this, because what you effectively would do is you'll create competition between different provinces or different municipalities, where if they have the hands on the levers of the police, there where they govern more accountable and where they govern more effectively, you create a province or a city that functions better and would eventually raise the game for all of the other provinces, because they'll have to start competing for the people moving in between provinces and cities for where they feel safer. And even worst case scenario, because the counter argument to that would be, well, you might sit with a situation where everyone leaves the continuously forever failing municipalities. Well, be that as it may, then at least people leave that city or province for a province that's more prosperous and more safe. So I don't really see the necessary downside to that argument.
Daniel, in terms of specific elements to attaining decentralization of the police, what would that look like? Is that, a constitutional amendment? Is it is it a cabinet decision? What might a sort of roadmap look like? On the other hand, is it just would it be up to a given province, decide this is what we're going to do? So one example for, just for argument's sake, the LEAP program in the city of Cape Town, could one make that argument that you said, look, we're already doing this, just, work with us here from a national point of view?
So I'll break it down into the sort of de facto and de jure approaches, and we can discuss them both, and we'll leave the de jure discussion for the last because it's probably the most boring part. So the point is, on a de facto level, yes, that's effectively what you do, is you decentralize by doing. And that's exactly what the Western Cape provincial government's doing, and what the city of Cape Town is doing even more so with more resources. Just this past week, the city has deployed 700 additional boots on the ground in Cape Town. The challenge is just, obviously, as the city of Cape Town keeps putting in water into this bucket, the national police are starting to just scoop more water out of it on a resource level. So 700 boots that we're filling isn't necessarily additional or a sort of extra capacity when SAPs are reducing theirs or losing their manpower. But the point is, that's the approach that you need to follow. Now, I know there's, for example, my good friend Martin van Staden, who's written that, well, the city of Cape Town should stop pursuing these sort of legal avenues and attempts to achieve devolution. They should just get on with it and do it. But and he ironically makes this point about real politics, saying, well, real politics requires the city just to simply do it and stop asking for permission. Well, I think what he fails to recognize is the city is already doing both. And that's the actual nature of real politics, is pursuing the de facto reality and trying to create the de jure reality as well. So practically speaking, the city is investing massively. The city of Cape Town is investing massively in policing. The city has shot spotter technology, which is essentially a shot detection system in the Cape Flats. The city has eye in the sky system, drone system. It has its own epic case management system. So the city is already working towards that. The challenge, however, comes in is you can police and prevent. So the city is already, municipal police are already allowed to prevent crime, but they're not allowed to investigate crime. Now, you can do a lot of crime prevention, but the point is, this challenge in, for example, the Western Cape, the majority of crime is organized crime. And the only way to stop organized crime is not through prevention, but it's through actual prosecution and investigation. And that's where the holdup is. The city it isn't allowed by the National Prosecuting Authority and the police, and receives no collaboration to actually prepare dockets and get cases prosecuted. And that's where you unfortunately have to pursue the de jure reality of allowing to also investigate. So getting to the options on the table, the one would be a broader constitutional challenge enshrining the rights of local governments to have their own police forces, which is obviously a considerably larger task at hand. We all know how long constitutional amendments take, and it's probably going to face extreme opposition. The alternative is that you look for an amendment of the SAPS Act, which specifically Section 64EC, which set out the powers of municipal police services. At the moment, it says a municipal police service can enforce its own bylaws, it can investigate traffic crimes, and then it can prevent crimes. And if you only add the two words "and investigate" to the last part, you already enable a lot of investigative, or essentially open up all investigative powers for municipal police services. And then the third, probably more politically pragmatic answer to this entire situation is for the Minister of Police to, through regulation, this is Section 64F of the SAPS Act, to delegate certain powers to municipal police services, or it can specifically give it to just the city of Cape Town or the province or whoever. And all three of these avenues the city is actively pushing for and pursuing. Just yesterday, there was a meeting between the Western Cape government, the city, and the Minister of Police. So these are sort of the legal avenues that can be explored. Interestingly enough, about a month or two ago, the Minister of Police published for comment a set of regulations granting more powers of investigation to all municipal police services. It's not just to Cape Town, to all municipal police services around the country. And these include expanded investigative powers on things like stock theft, gender-based violence, etc. So a number of things. So the point is, I think the country is moving in that direction. The question is just how quickly can it happen? Because the quicker it happens, the more lives that can be saved.
Daniel, we see it in CRA polling year after year. I mean, we're doing it for about more than 10 years now. And you see it when you ask South Africans, what are the top two priorities that government should focus on? Mm-hmm. Consistently is crime and unemployment. I mean, those two by far outweigh all the other priorities. I know it's not, it's a sleight of hand from an analyst point of view, because you try and force people to only choose two things when there are, I mean, all of us have many priorities in our daily lives that we want the government to focus on, but crime and unemployment, leading up to next year's local government elections, or, at the latest, early 2027, next ANC elective conference, next national elections in 2029, linking this to the popularity of someone like Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi in KZN and how he has moved to deal with crime in that particular province. I mean, do you see political parties across the board really trying to get a handle on this issue of crime and looking at ideas like decentralization? We don't have to go through each party's manifesto, but are you seeing it, trying to think of more creative ways to deal with this issue coming to the fore?
Yes. I certainly think so. And I think, just to touch on the first remark you made regarding safety and unemployment, I don't think it's necessarily an endless sleight of hand. The point is, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those are the two basic things that people want, right? You can sort of think about all these other higher causes and considerations, but if you're not safe, you're not fed, you don't have a roof over your head, obviously that's going to be your priority. So safety certainly has to be one of the biggest concerns and priorities in South Africa. So the devolution question, I mean, it is a highly politicized thing, right? It's a word that has sort of a lot of political baggage. And it's quite interesting. The Minister of Police has recently said that he sort of doesn't want to talk about devolution or decentralization in these big, broad political terms. He'd rather talk about the practice or the practicalities of how do we achieve devolution, which, I mean, you can, for us sort of policy whizzes and ideologues, we can talk about all of that as long as we want. But the point is, where the tacky hits the tar, you just want implementation and practicality. So that's perfectly fine if devolution is pursued in these practical terms by the Minister of Police. On a level of sort of sentiment, I do think and get the impression that the tide is turning and these conversations are going to increase. And I think the likelihood of achieving decentralization and devolution is just going to continue to snowball. You already, for example, see the South African Local Government Association, SOLGA, taking overtly decentralized positions, and they pursuing these actively, not just on policing, on a variety of things. They're opposing a new piece of national legislation called the Public Services Amendment Act that essentially wants to put local government under the scrutiny of the Public Services Commission. They are opposing a bunch of regulations relating to water and electricity and tariffs. So I think you are seeing that movement, and it will just continue to increase as sort of the failure of centralization becomes even more stark and evident. The solution will be further decentralization.
Daniel, to put ourselves in the position of someone who might be very concerned about any move towards decentralization, so to link to your introductory remarks just around some of the original context in the Constitution, and for the ANC specifically, concerns about, when there's sort of militias running around the country and that kind of thing. What could there be any sort of checks and balances that you put in place in your ideal decentralized policing framework that would ensure that it's not, that kind of thing where you just have, I guess, enclaves in provinces and in metros that really takes over from the national police and the national government.
So interestingly, the point is that that's sort of how policing works globally, right? In most other countries, is you have a decentralized structure. In the States, for all its quirks, it really functions very federalized, and you have sort of the FBI overseeing a lot of the federal criminal investigations, because you have federal crimes and you have state level crimes, and you sort of sometimes they overlap. I mean, it's sort of become a trope in Hollywood movies, when the FBI steps in and they take over the matter. But the point is, it works relatively well. You see the same in the UK. They have a very sort of county-based policing system. You see it in Germany. They have the Lander system. You see it even in Japan. So even in China, a country that is highly centralized, very communist, they have municipal policing, right? Because municipalities, interestingly enough, in China compete fiercely. It's quite ironic. We sort of see it as this example of centralization, but China has a lot of sort of meritocracy and competition when it comes to municipalities competing for business and for citizens moving there. So the point is, the international example is not of centralization in policing. It's completely in the direction of decentralization. So that would be my first counter argument, is it works elsewhere, why not in South Africa? Secondly, when you say that you can either follow two routes. You can either say we need no SAPs and only devolve it to local governments or police, or you can do the reasonable thing where you say, well, let's just give municipalities and provinces the ability to also investigate and also prevent crime, right? So there it's taking hands and working together and cooperating. And I think that would be the most constitutionally compliant route to follow, because the Constitution already requires cooperative governance and, the spheres of government to work together. And in a variety of other areas, you already have overlapping jurisdictions. If you look at housing, for example, also a question that sort of rests on both local government and provinces and national. And then obviously you need the private sector, because that's where the actual development will really happen. I mean, and that sort of a discussion, I think we need an additional 20 minutes for, is what will the role be of private entities and communities in safety and security in South Africa. But we can only sort of start getting to that question when we start evolving and decentralizing policing in the first place.
I think, Daniel, that's a very good segue into my last sort of question or query for you. Maybe the appeal of silver bullets, and we see this across the board in policy, sort of across the spectrum. I mean, even at this point in time, we've got a new policy document out from the ANC, where they talk about widening the mandate of the South African Reserve Bank to target employment, as though that then cures all the supply side issues of electricity and labor laws and property rights and logistics and all that sort of stuff. So in this particular area, in your business day piece, you do say that the decentralization isn't a panacea for the crime, many crime issues. So if you could just sort of conclude around what can be done by businesses, maybe by citizens, at least in the meantime, until we get to a kind of more firmed up, decentralized area. What do you think those businesses and citizens and communities can do to, I guess, to practice decentralization in the crime space or the security space?
So I always I'm trying to coin this phrase, policy romanticism, the idea that if you just have a smart enough, most beautiful plan, that it will necessarily result in implementation and results. But the same goes for proponents of decentralization, right? You can have this beautiful decentralization plan. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate into actual results and the lower crime rates. You actually need to do things. You need to stop talking and actually make a difference. But the argument and sort of the overarching, and I think the kicker argument, is that we've tried centralization, right? It's failed. So we need to try something else. It really is as simple as that. You don't even have to give guarantees that it's going to be better. The point is, what we have had has failed. let's try something else to turn the tide against crime. Getting to the question about sort of what do we do in the meantime, well, I think South Africans will just continue doing what they're doing already, organizing on a community level, starting as close and to your family as possible, join your neighborhood watch, try to keep your community safe, and let that sort of spread the light from there. And then secondly, the point is our constitution and our legal framework allows for the amendment of laws, right? We sort of tend to think about government as this sort of mythical creature up there, and every now and then, every 3 or 5 or whatever years, we get in touch with them and we tell them what we want. But the point is, South Africans should actively be demanding for decentralization and devolution. And it's not just a matter of your own voice. You need to start convincing those around you that what you're saying and advocating for is worth a shot, why we need to try something else. And that's part of the democracy that we stay in. So that it's certainly a part of trying to create a safe environment in South Africa is to convince the people around you that we need to do it and how we'll do it.
Very, very much so. I think it is tried to talk about South Africans' resilience, but you do see it repeated time after time, and people are looking for new ideas, new solutions. So the more we can, I think, share this kind of thing, the better, and the more momentum you get. This sort of virtuous cycle versus the vicious cycle that we've been in for arguably the last 15 years, maybe a little bit longer, especially on the economic prosperity front. So Daniël, thanks very much for your time, your insights today. Exactly the kind of sort of discussion and ideas we need at this point in time in South Africa's space of contested politics, more opportunities for policy reform, I think, than ever before. So we really appreciate that. To all of you, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't yet, before you leave, please like this video. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And finally, if you are not yet a premium client of the CRA, we invite you to become a client. You can find more information at the link in the description below. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.